Thank you, Natrajan. Thank you, Raj and Suba. I don't know whether you're there, but thank you for the opportunity. I'm looking forward to this time and space to interact with you during the next 75 odd minutes. We're going to begin with silence. And what is this creature called silence? And my first question to you would be, what is your relation with silence? What happens to you with silence? You're all coaches, and in a sessions room, who is bringing the silence? A friend of mine once said, the one who has an urge to fill silence is the client. So who is bringing the silence in your sessions room, and what is your relation with that silence? Well, in that moment of coaching, or in that moment of a relationship, be it with yourself, be it with the client, be it in the field, what kind of a relation is that? Well, my first question to you would be, what is your intention for this 1 hour? What would you like to take back for yourself at the end of this 1 hour? When you connect a coaching conversation, we use this word empathy. And most of us as practitioners or people who are in this field are heavily working on knowing what the process is, or knowing what the tools are, or knowing what the technique is, or knowing what the technology is. That's one part of it, right? The process. It's important to know the process, like the swish process, like the regression process. These are all processes. But what are these processes kept on? These processes are kept on skill sets. You can't run the process if you don't have the skills. Now, what is the skills kept on? The skills are kept on empathy and dignity. The client sitting in front of you is equal to you. So if you can't elicit empathy and dignity, then your skills are going to be useless and the processes are going to be very arrogant. But the real question to ask is, on what do you keep empathy and dignity? It's built on silence. It's built there. And that's where we're going to connect. And that's the beginning of awareness. That's the beginning of Vipassana. That's the beginning of compassion. That's the beginning of sponsorship. That's the beginning of seeing what the client has stopped seeing in themselves. It's the ability to hear what the client has stopped hearing for themselves. Am I clear with this much? But on the silence, we will keep empathy and dignity. And on this, we'll build our skill sets. And on this, we'll build our tools, our techniques, our processes, our technologies, and all of that. But you see, these are scripts. These are available everywhere. And I can Google and see what are the ICF competencies. I can Google and see what is the regression technique, or what is the timeline therapy. And then I can Google and see what are the skills. Okay, listening is a skill. Great. Okay, and I can learn these. But then what is empathy? What is dignity? And what is silence? Is it really silent when you are silent? And when you attempt to step into this place of silence, what are you paying attention to? Well, one, you're paying attention to the body, movement, sensations, breath. Then you're paying attention to the mind. What's this mind comprising of? It's comprised of language patterns, linguistic models of, and then we can put it as self-worth, esteems, values, beliefs, rules, permissions, etc. What would it be if you just sit like 30 seconds right now? How does it feel? 30 seconds. Are you forced to move? Or are you forcing yourself to be still? What's happening in your mind? Is there a tension anywhere? And silence is not stillness. But stillness can have silence. But if this position is coming from a force, then that's oppression, right? Then you're suppressing the bodily urges. The aim is not to force that silence. The aim is to address the noise. If you address the noise, you may listen to shame, you may listen to guilt, you may listen to self-esteem, you may listen to doubts, you may listen to all those narratives that you've carried on, which were the point of impact, and if the impact is more, then it can be traumatic. So when you sit for silence, the question is, well, what's happening? And you say, oh, okay, there's a little bit of stress here, and that exploration today, what is that? And then again, when you sit for silence, you'll say, oh, well, what happened in my 5th standard in my school came up. I don't know how, but well, that needs to be addressed. And then you understand something more deeper, something more profound. You understand what is empathy? My teacher, Dick, we asked him, so what do you do with the silence and what is this concept of coaching, right? And he, in his own words, said he was explaining what coaching is and whatever terms we call it now, right? We call it coaching, we call it psychotherapy, we call it counseling, whatever you call it and whatever you are or whoever you are. Says counseling, he says, is a dynamic process. It is ever evolving. And it's an exciting experience that calls you to support a client so that they can discover their resources. But in that moment, if there is chaos in your world, there is chaos in the field. And that can be a disturbance to their presence. And that can be a disturbance to their navigation. So can you be a mirror without transference, without contamination of your neurology? And they both are important, right? Contamination of neurology is what are you coming with? Maybe you had a fight and you're coming with that. You didn't know how to neuro-clean yourself before you step into the session. And maybe the client you're talking to helps you remember your ex, or their voice is like your father. But transference has already happened. You're not neuro-clean. There's contamination in the field. Return that love. Well, there's a problem. Yeah. And therefore, the question is, will you be that silent metaphor in that moment? And he continues to say, it calls you to hold space. So what is holding space? We're going to talk on empathy and holding space in some time. So this client is sitting in front of Dick, and the client is asking Dick, what do I do now? She presented her narrative, and then she's asking Dick, what do I do now? And Dick is saying, in his most humble way, he was almost 83 when I met him first. And now he's saying, perhaps it is something we may discover together and slowly. Is that acceptable to you in your coaching contract? Perhaps it is something we discover together and slowly. There's no rush. When I conduct supervision, what I see sometimes is there is a rush to ask the next question, And my curiosity is, where the fuck is empathy? Could you hold that space and could you present it to the client in a way that aligns with their neurology? That impatience that the coach brings to the field is their own restlessness. And if you give sufficient space between the client's sharing and your question, you will be surprised to know the client begins to share again. If you hold on to your intellectual questions and cognitive participation, or your urge to see, oh, I think I got what it is, and you ask, so what is that? How does that make you feel? Or would it be okay to take it there? Where do you see your father? You have all these intelligent models. But then you're taking away the volition of the client to discover their trajectory, to discover their tapestry. Okay, let's take the first activity. Okay, and we'll keep the room open for 2 minutes, 120 seconds. And here's what you're going to do in the room. You're going to go in the room and you're going to see a partner. Your job is to sit there in stillness and silence in the presence of another person. Now, I want you to understand whether you have an urge to greet. Well, I want to know whether you have an urge to make them comfortable. Or is it okay to just be you? Are you okay in your presence is my question, okay? And we'll find that out after you come back. Yeah, sometimes you may have an urge to smile at them or maybe just blink your eyes at them. Well, what I'm saying is zero communication. Well, just let me know for 2 minutes, how was it for you to be in your presence, in the presence of another? Okay, well, we'll find out when you come back. Right. That brings some kind of awareness, right? And that brings me to a definition of empathy. What is empathy? Empathy is your presence. And what do you mean by this word, your presence? It's presence through awareness. My teacher, she tells me that if your presence cannot heal, don't even try words. Well, presence is one, for you to be in their field without having an urge to edit their experience. When they're telling their story, or when they're exploring their world, or when they're navigating to their subjective experience of pain and trial and tribulations and whatever that is for them, do you have an urge to edit their experience, to add something more, to delete something more, or to compare, to add, to delete, to compare? Like you'll say, oh, you know what? I remember this person of mine. That was different. Or, you know what? Why don't you try this? Well, you've become a consultant already. Well, you begin to identify with the client, and that's not going to work for the client. You may want good for the client, but that's not what the client wants for themselves. We are dealing with subjective experience. You don't know what I see through my eyes. You will never know. And all your attempt to show me what you see through your eyes, I may still not see. So empathy is presence without the urge to edit their experience, without having a need to add something, without having a need to delete something, without having a need to compare that with anything else. That brings me to the next point. So empathy is when you don't have an urge to rescue the client. Well, we want to rescue the client, now don't we sometimes? We'll say, you know what, I'll tell you what to do. Why don't you take the first step? Why don't you take the parent and keep it over here? Why don't you do this? Well, you know what? For the next time, I'll tell you 5 things that you do, and I'll call up and follow up also with you. Well, that's my need. If the success of the client is directly proportional to your self-esteem, then, well, you've taken away the whole interaction. That outcome is not your monkey, not your circus. That outcome is not, the process is yours. That experience is yours. Well, that's a moment of discovery. What Dake says, it's a moment of discovery slowly and together. Slowly and together. When they're telling something which is completely opposite to your world. Well, did you identify with the client? Did you identify with the client's problem? Did you identify with the abuser that the client is bringing to the field? Then you've taken the hologram of the client's representation. Now you are completing your story by being one of the polarities. That's not neuroclean. You may want good for the client. You want good for your child. But that's not what they want for themselves. So what Byrne calls as the okayness is, I'm okay with your not being okay. Not being okay according to me. And all those times when I have a need to compare your experience, when I have a need to add to your experience, when I have a need to delete your experience, when I have a need to rescue you, that's coming from my point of view. That is coming from my point of view. So this urge is coming from my point of view, and my point of view is my subjective experience. This is my watermelon that I ate when I was growing up without even knowing what it is, and I spend the rest of my life spitting those seeds. I didn't know when I was eating that. It could be my mother, it could be my father, it could be things that's coming up to my life because of my experiences, because of my education, because of my environment. But as children, we ate our parents like watermelon, and we spend the rest of our life spitting those seeds. And that's my point of view. My point of view gives me my definition. My definition is how I confine my world. The moment I define something, I confine something, and because I confined it, and because it's my definition, it's my belief, it's my value, it's my point of view, it's my rule through which I see the world, because I confine it, I now begin defending it. I got to tell people why it's right. What I define, I defend. What I define, I confine. And because I defined and because I confined, I lose the opportunity to see for anything that it could possibly be or become. I take away its metamorphosis. I take away the process with which it can grow to be anything else, because I've defined it. And that's my point of view. So I cannot see the client in their world. I cannot see the client in their subjective experience. And I want to change that. I want to help them. I want to rescue them. So what is empathy? Empathy is an opportunity that you have to be present without having a need to rescue them. And is that okay, is my question. So lastly, what is empathy? Empathy is judging nothing. And when you reach this state, if you reach that state, and well, sometimes in life we can. Well, empathy is not disconnection. That's a misunderstanding. Well, you can say, well, if I might find a stranger, I don't need to add anything or delete anything, or I'm not affected with it, and I don't have a point of view. Well, empathy is not disconnection. Empathy is presence through connection. Empathy is not attachment. Empathy is association. Now, what happens to the quality and texture of your silence in the presence of another? They bring out your demons. They bring out your shadow. They bring out your dark side. And you know who brings out this the most? Your romantic partners. You know why they bring out this the most? Because you open up multiple corridors to them. And in one of those corridors, your demons live. That childhood hurt, which you've kept it in those subterranean quarters forever, that breakup which you didn't deserve, that abuse that happened, that loss that took place when you were in seventh standard, or that bully that happened to you, you've kept it in deep corridors. And you've come up to show the world that you're strong, you're smart, you're impressive, and you're fine with it. You're doing great. But one fine day, you fell in love with someone and you wanted to open up everything without working with yourself. And you begin to open up layers and layers and layers, and they touch those demons. They spark a fire. Oof, another impact. You see those repeated patterns, and that's the work. So now you bring awareness to your patterns. You bring the stillness again and you say, hey, what happened? What happens when I'm quiet? Where's this noise? Is the noise in my knee? Is it in my leg? Is it in my abdomen? Where is this noise? And silence, the work of silence is not to shut it, but it's exactly the opposite. It's to get it to speak loudly and roar. It's to let its kingdom come so that it can come out and dance the dance and tell you what it really meant and how bad it was for it to stay there for so long. And it's felt unfortunate because you've never heard those hurt. And after that impact and the diabolic split, that part was staying there forever. It's been 10 years, it's been 20 years, it's been 40 years. You've not cried that grief, you've not grieved that loss, you've not addressed that bully. Time to meet those parts of you in silence. You know what's noisy in silence? Those parts that you've shut, those parts that you've shut. They're going to talk a lot. Are you going to silence them again? Then guess who's the tyrant? Silence is not introspection. Well, introspection is introspection. Silence is not introspection. Silence is also not reflection. Silence is everything that I cannot say. We'll get into another activity, and this time for 5 minutes. Then make sure you look into their eyes and see what you feel about yourself. And ask yourself, do I have an urge to rescue them? Are they uncomfortable? Should I make them feel comfortable? Do I want to correct something? Do I want to tell them something through my non-verbal communications? Or are you just okay looking at yourself through their eyes? And you know what you'll find there in their eyes? You will find your self-talks. You will find your self-doubts. You will find your hierarchies. Because through their eyes, you will also get what the concept of transference is. Because you're going to tell yourself what they think about yourself without having any proof. And you know why that's happening? That's happening because you've not addressed that. Well, silence gives you the opportunity to work on self. Are you ready? You're ready. Don't be a tyrant in the name of meditation. Don't be a tyrant in the name of silence. Now, I had a client who once came to my room and said, today my day is not good. I'm very angry. In the morning when I sat for meditation, the whole house was yelling and I couldn't focus on my meditation. And therefore I'm out of state. I'm like, wow, whatever that was in meditation. Because whatever that stopped you from going inside is inwardly empty. Okay, so let's get into a 5-minute breakout room and come back. So and how was it this time? Break one says, show me the ways you avoid stillness and I'll show you the patterns that run your life. When you take away stillness, all that you have is reaction. And when you add stillness to your actions, you can connect with your intention. When you connect with your intention with silence, then your actions are always in the sacred space. You are ready to accept those consequences because you are responsible for your life. Now you take responsibility. Now you feel that it's within my control, even when things fail, because you know how to navigate. It's only through silence you're in touch with your intention. How else would you be in touch with the world when it is so dynamic and so changing, and when triggers are present everywhere? And death can be a moment, and this can be the last time we see another human being. How do you get ready for a world like that? So when the client comes to you, underneath the presenting problem propelling a person to the therapy room, there is a longing of love, or it's a failed relationship, or it's depression, or it's anxiety, or it's family fights, or it's work crisis, or it's grief, or it's loss. And people come to this room because every trick of the game to fill them has failed. Ambition failed them. Assets failed them. Accumulation failed them. Compensation failed them. Avoiding the grief failed them. Overcompensating the pain failed them. They failed everything. And in that room, if you are also going to fail them with your stories and your voices and noises and theories and techniques and tools and processes, then they continue to stay psychoneurotic. Psychoneurosis must be understood as a purpose that's still not fulfilled for their soul. Have you experienced this? That you really worked hard for something, and when it came to you, it didn't mean anything. You really worked hard for that relation, or for that bike, or for that trip, or for that award in corporate, but when you got it, you're like, it's okay. Like it didn't mean aha for you. Well, that's psychoneurosis. When the purpose of the soul is still not met, and therefore you're filling it up. You're filling it up because that within is painful. And so you're covering it with certifications, with assets, and this and that, and this and that. So what values and beliefs and point of views and promises and compensations and avoidances of your life you know are limiting you, but you still kept it? What are you in service of that is still not fulfilling you, and you're still okay to continue on that journey? And how sacrificing yourself you think you're achieving the higher glory? How does pain give you meaning? And because that world is so painful, because the abuse was painful, because the memory of the trauma was painful, or because the memory of that loss was painful, people try to not be still. Because in being still, that comes up. That loss comes up. The memory of the bully comes up. It comes up, right? So what do? We fill it up with busyness. We fill up our calendars and we fill up our lives. We participate in relations that are no more serving us, and we collect more of them because we feel that this abuse is better than the abandonment. And we continue to suffer in ways that we define. Judy once said, she says that we all know the best way to sabotage our lives. So how do you equate to psychoneurosis? It must be understood ultimately as a suffering of the soul that has not discovered its meaning yet. So people come to you for therapy or for coaching or whatever that is, because they're not able to regulate themselves. They got a hit in life and they're still living there. The hit happened 10 years ago, or the hit happened yesterday. It's been time, but they're not able to regulate themselves. They're not able to come back to the trajectory. They're not able to participate in homeostasis or homeoresis. Homeostasis is coming back to the same path, or homeoresis is making a decision that the path is no more what I want to be on. Therefore, I change the goal, I carve the new path. Self-regulation. And in stillness, you find, why is silence so important, and why is it connected to psychotherapy? Because it carves the path of self-regulation. Second, the ability to express. And that's the definition of a good relationship, right? The ability to express conflicting and difficult and opposing ideas with ease. And if I can't be in that relation with somebody, am I even in a relation with myself? Thirdly, the ability to belong to your world, to my work world. And what proof do you have that you belong? The only proof you have that you belong is you are entitled to experiment and fail. What proof do you have that you can express is when you can express difficult, conflicting ideas with ease. That's how you relate to self, relate to others, relate to the field. You stand on a mountain, and do you relate to that? You relate to the field. You see a cup of coffee and you relate to that. You see maybe a cup of something else and you say, well, that's not what I relate to. We relate to the field. Inanimate also, we relate. And we find our poetries there. We find our songs there. We find our dance there. Our creativity is there. We don't find it when we don't belong. That happens in silence. And it's only then we can participate. What do you mean by participation? It's when what is in me, I can contribute. Or you don't find meaning in this world because I can't contribute. I can't contribute my voice. I can't contribute my painting. I can't contribute my conversations. I can't contribute. When I can't contribute, I'm dead. A part in me keeps dying. When I can't express, a part in me keeps dying. When I can't relate, a part in me keeps dying. Find out which relationships are not serving you. And how do you define what's not serving you is to ask yourself, where can I not regulate myself? In whose presence? Where can I not express myself? In which context? Where can I not relate with? In which context? Where do I don't belong? Where do I have to walk on eggshells all the time? And lastly, where do I feel I'm insignificant? I don't contribute. I don't exist. And this is not a diagnosis. This is a discovery, slowly and together. It's a process, slowly and together, which happens maybe in nanoseconds, maybe through micro expressions, maybe through bodily sensations, maybe through an aha moment in linguistic patterns. But you got to see the sunrise slowly and together. And that's the gift of silence, which you can give your children, your parents. Remember, silence is filled with expression. It's not silent. It's not dead. Silence is not disconnected. So if you think I can be silent the whole day, my question is, are you connected? Are you interacting? Are you expressing? Are you relating? Are you contributing? Is your silence growing? Is it a fertile void? It's a fertile void, what Fritz calls. It's a fertile void. It's not empty. It's not a dark land. It's not the underworld. These are corridors to the fertile world. Yeah. Yes.
Hi.
Hey, go on.
Should I speak?
Oh, good. Who knows?
This was amazing. What I really loved is the it was such a powerful up-leveling of the definition of empathy, because I know for me, you kind of taught empathy as feeling, putting yourself in the shoes of another person. And what this really did was put empathy into the dialect of love, where it's really simply not attachment, but it's just genuine love, and not being judgy and not having to be in that person's shoes, but just being open, I guess, in the silence to that energy, that expression. So that was my big, huge takeaway. And what I also loved about this was it's very soul knowing. It's everything is coming from soul knowing and soul self, versus more the human ride, if that makes sense at all. So I really appreciate this, and I thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you for sharing. Give me your name. I'm not able to read it from here.
It's Lori Woolridge.
Lori, yeah. Empathy is definitely the opposite of being in somebody else's shoes, because then transference has happened. Now the question is, what if I step into somebody's shoes and I can't relate to that shoes? Can I not conduct the session now? You see the difficulty there? So empathy is exactly the opposite of that. Well, this is beyond textbooks, through experience. And this is what I've seen in my teachers, and I felt them so empathetic. And one more thing, if you'd like to write it down forever, empathy is filled with fucking brutal fucking honesty. Like the first and the third words are so important. It's filled with brutal honesty. It's not filled with nasty, ass-licking conversations. And if you think there's an urge for that, what you're trying to say is, I don't belong in this world. I don't connect to this field. I can't express what I want. Now that's very dangerous. Well, when you're presenting the brutal honesty, well, you're presenting it through empathy. Yeah, empathy is the texture. Empathy is the wrap. Empathy is the weave that threads. Empathy is always, it's all through. The moment you disconnect from empathy, you've disconnected from the source of life. Empathy, I think it starts there and it ends there. If you can't be empathetic, that means I'm not connected to self. That means I'm not connected to you. That means the whole concept of Buddhism goes off. Compassion. It comes And if compassion goes away, then forgiveness goes away. Because I can forgive you only when I understand that your actions stemmed from your own traumatic responses. It wasn't my fault that I was subjected to that brutality. Having said that, it's my responsibility to heal from that. Well, it's not my responsibility what happened to me, but it's my responsibility to heal from that. And because it's my responsibility to heal from that, it doesn't mean it doesn't mean I should do it alone. But that understanding comes from compassion that, well, hey, I know what happened. I don't deserve that. I didn't deserve that. Nobody deserves it. But forgiveness can come only when I understand that my attacker, my abuser, the one who abandoned me, their responses came from their hurt. And that's the highest. That's now we're taking mindfulness, we're going beyond psychotherapy, and we're stepping into spirituality. Do you get that connection here? And you need that understanding of depth, because your client over there is sitting there because they can't forgive their abuser. And your processes will not help. They'll come back, they will rebound, because it's a progressive process. Life will again throw triggers at them, and they'll find this in another romantic partner. They will find it in their boss. They will find those things in their church. They will find it in movies, and it'll break them down. So how do you rise to the occasion of being silent because the client sitting in front of you is going through a dark night? How do you rise to this occasion today? How might you rise to this calling? And that's the gift of the profession that you and I are into. Discovering slowly and together.